Good morning and welcome to the third meeting of the California Commission on the State of Hate. I'm Russell Roybal. I'm the chair of the commission, and I want to welcome all the commissioners and staff and those tuning in to observe our meeting today. We're so glad that you're here, and I want to say hello to my fellow commissioners, and as this is the beginning of Ramadan, I want to wish those who are observing Ramadan a Ramadan Mubarak. I'm excited to lead you through the meeting today. But before we do that, we want to make sure that we have quorum. So Deputy Director Watts, could you please call the roll?
Sure. Chair Roybal.
Present.
Vice Chair Salcedo.
Present.
Che.
Present.
Cuellar.
Present.
Damsky.
Present.
Filer.
Present.
Levin.
Present.
Sanar.
Present.
Southers. Southers is not present, so it looks like we have 8 out of 9 folks here, and we have a quorum.
Thank you, Deputy Director Watts. I also want to start by saying that closed captioning of this meeting is available. You can access that by clicking on the button labeled Show Captions at the bottom of your screen. We do have a quorum, so we will move forward. I want to quickly review the agenda, and again, welcome you all to this third meeting of the Commission on the State of Hate. You may view the agenda by visiting the Commission's website, which you can do in a search engine by putting in Commission on the State of Hate. That will take you to the website. The website is also, we can put the website in the chat. It's calcivilrights.ca.gov/Commission on the State of Hate. And you can click on the button there on the website, Meetings and Agendas. Again, we'll put the link in the chat. Before reviewing the agenda, I'd like to review the process for public comment. First, this commission, as we all know, is a public body, and an important part of being a public body is hearing from the public, and there'll be opportunities for public comment throughout our meeting today. To keep an orderly meeting, please make sure to comment only on the agenda item under consideration. If you have any comments that are not related to items on the agenda, there is an agenda item later in the agenda for public comment on items not on the agenda. To submit a written public comment, you may do so by emailing the commission, which we will also put in the chat. The email address is on the screen, is csh@calcivilrights.ca.gov. We'll be monitoring this channel throughout the meeting. If you submit a written comment that pertains to an agenda item, we will read it out loud or summarize it when the public comment portion of the agenda item is open and before any vote. If the comment is not about a specific agenda item, we'll read it aloud or summarize it at the end of the meeting during the public comment on items not on the agenda. If you would like to speak during the meeting to deliver your public comment, you'll have the opportunity to do so during the public comment portions of the meeting. To request to speak, please, on Zoom, please raise your hand on Zoom. If you're joining on a computer, you can raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. During the public comment portion, we will call on all attendees who raise their hands to allow them to unmute and to deliver comments. In the interest of time, public comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and I will be keeping time on that. That's just some information about how to comment publicly. Now I just want to quickly review the agenda today. We'll be approving the minutes shortly. We'll get a report from our staff colleagues at the California Civil Rights Department. We'll be doing an informational presentation and discussion led by Commissioner Levin today on hate crime trends, a changing threat, and invisible records. I think all of us are looking forward to that. We'll take a break at some point during the meeting. We may we are likely to move the informational presentation to after the subcommittee reports on the agenda. So just an FYI on that. We'll also do some updates from the subcommittees. we have a proposal to around the subcommittee structure, which we will review and then take comment and vote on. We'll have any brief announcements from the commissioners, and then we'll, of course, have public comment for items that are not on the agenda, talk about future agenda items, and then we will adjourn. So, any questions on the agenda before we move into approval of the minutes? Great. So let us move to our first item of business today, which is to approve the minutes from our last meeting. Again, those minutes are available on the website. There is a link in the chat for folks to review. So I would love to entertain a motion from one of the commissioners to approve the minutes, and then we'll get to discussion.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Is there a second?
I will second that, Commissioner
you.
Johnson.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Are there any discussion about the minutes, any corrections or edits that we should be aware of? Great, thank you. Is there any public comment related to the approval of the minutes?
There are no public comments.
Thank you very much. So we have a motion. It's been seconded. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you.
I have a point of order, Chair.
Sure.
Do we need to do this by roll call for our records?
Deputy Director Watts, do we need to go through the roll to do that? I think we did that last time now that Commissioner Damsky brings that up.
Sure. Why don't we just go ahead and do that? That'd be
Sure.
great.
So will you call the roll, please?
Sure. Roy Ball,
Yes, approve.
Salcedo,
Yes.
Che,
Approved.
Cuellar,
Yes.
Damsky,
Yes.
Filer,
Yes.
Levin,
Yes.
Sinar,
Yes.
Southers. It's not here. That's 8 folks approving the minutes. Great.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for that point of order, Commissioner Damsky. Let us now move to a report from our colleagues at the California Civil Rights Department. Deputy Director Romero, I believe you are giving the report today.
Good morning, commissioners. I have 5 brief updates from the department. First, this month, I'm excited to share with you that the governor appointed Rishi Khalsa to be our department's Deputy Director of Communications. He'll be joining the department in April. And before this, he was a press secretary with the California Department of Justice since 2019. Once he's on board, we'll make sure that he comes to a commission meeting so that you can meet him and he can meet you. Second, I'm also excited to share that on Friday, we released a request for proposals for a media and outreach campaign to both reintroduce our department to Californians under our new name and to promote civil rights. As you all know, in 2020, our department was renamed from the Department of Fair Employment and Housing to the Civil Rights Department to better reflect our existing authorities and services. And so now we're excited to do a media and outreach campaign to make sure that Californians know about us. Alec, I wonder if you could drop in the chat a link to the RFP. Commissioners or anyone out there in the public, if you know potential bidders who might be interested in bidding on this RFP, please share with them this link. The deadline to submit bids is April 14th. Third, this month we released data on non-binary workers from the 2020 pay data report submitted to the Civil Rights Department by private employers with 100 or more employees. As you may know, our department is the first state or federal agency to systematically collect comprehensive quantitative data on non-binary workers' employment, compensation, and job placement. The data are available for download on our department's website. And Alec, I think you could drop in the chat, the link. What the results show are that non-binary workers are concentrated in the lowest paying jobs. And a large percentage of non-binary workers, while they're also concentrated in the highest paying jobs, this was not consistent across race and ethnicities. Few Black and Latino non-binary workers were in those higher paying jobs. Fourth, I wanted to share with you all that the Civil Rights Council has initiated a regulatory process under Government Code Section 11135. This is the statute that prohibits all state administered and state funded programs from discriminating or providing equal opportunity on the basis of various protected characteristics. The regulations have not been updated since the 1980s when they were first promulgated by a different agency than ours. Our department obtained authority to enforce this section of the law in the late, around a few years ago. And our council is now beginning the rulemaking to implement that statute and update it in the many years since they were created. The council will be holding a public hearing on this rulemaking on April 3rd. And if anyone is interested, the council is receiving comments on the proposed regulations until 5 p.m. on April 3rd. And Alec just put in the chat a link to the council's website. So if you'd like to access the rulemaking file as it currently exists, it's available there. And we encourage you to participate. Then finally, as we have shared with you before, our department is investing in producing rigorous research on discrimination and hate violence. And we've done that through investments in the California Health Interview Survey run out of UCLA. We are sponsoring research on housing discrimination, voucher utilization, and hate violence. And the results should come in 2025. But this month, we sponsored research using 2021 data on housing affordability and housing stability during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so just a couple of weeks ago, CHIS released this study and found that about 1 in 10 California adults reported having financial difficulties paying for rent or mortgage in 2021 because of COVID-19. And about 4.4% reported that their current housing situation felt unstable. The disparities that CHIS found were not consistent across various protected characteristics, including race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and citizenship status. I don't have time to go into all of the results now, but Alec has put in the chat a link to the study. So I encourage all of you and the public to review the research, and of course the research is helpful to us as we continue to be an evidence-based agency that is looking to address civil rights issues. And with that, thank you.
Thank you for that report. I want to open it up to any questions from the commissioners about any of the items that Deputy Director Romero covered. Any questions? Thank you. Is there any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Thank you. I just want to commend the staff and to you, Deputy Director Romero, on the report today. I'm very excited to dig into the non-binary data. As someone who identifies as non-binary, I'm excited that California is leading the way in collecting that information. I also want to extend my sincere thanks to the staff, Deputy Director Romero, Deputy Director Watts, Deputy Director Monroe, who's not with us today, our colleagues from the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, Christina, Gregory, and Marquez, who all went to the Stop the Hate convening last week or a couple of weeks ago in Los Angeles. and represented the Civil Rights Department to the grantees there. I think that the grantees were very excited about having such supportive members at the California Civil Rights Department around the issues that those organizations are facing throughout California. So the team did a great job. So I just want to extend my thanks and appreciation to you for being there. It was a really great event. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But let's go ahead and move on to updates from the chair and subcommittees. I'll go ahead and start. I do have a few updates that I just want to brief you all on. Vice Chair Salcedo and I met with the staff. I'm sorry if you hear the banging in the background. There is some unfortunate construction happening outside my window today. But Vice Chair Salcedo and I got to meet with members of the staff in Los Angeles. I want to extend my thanks to Vice Chair Salcedo for hosting us at the Trans-Latino Coalition in Los Angeles. And we met to do some planning. I think all of us have been a little bit wandering in terms of what we're doing around our subcommittee work and the work of the commission, because we are trying to create the architecture around the commission as it is a new effort. So we had an opportunity to meet with the staff to start to put together a plan for the commission. It was a great meeting. It was myself, Vice Chair Salcedo, Deputy Director Watts, Deputy Director Romero, and Deputy Director Monroe. And so we are going to be putting, the staff is going to be taking that information and putting together a document that we will review at the next commission meeting around how to move forward around all of the work that we're going to be doing. And then we'll be checking in with the subcommittees. So Alec may mention some of these things in some of the subcommittee meetings as the staff gathers information to put together a draft of the plan. One of the things that we will do, we are required by statute to produce a report annually by July 1st. So as all of you know, we have not made a tremendous amount of progress on data collection, et cetera, because the commission is very new and there is just a lot of issues around the data that is available. And so the plan for our July 1st plan is to actually release this strategic plan to say what we're going to be doing over the next few years to get to a place where we can produce a plan and have data that we can rely on for policy recommendations, et cetera. So like I said, at the April meeting, we will present a draft of the plan that then the subcommittees will have an opportunity to go back and to look at, to add to, et cetera. We may move the May and June meetings. We may combine them into one meeting instead of meeting in May, meeting in early June to adopt that plan. So it has the requisite amount of time to be reviewed by other state agencies. So be on the lookout for that at our next meeting. Although, like I said, staff may be asking some of the subcommittees for some of their feedback prior to that. And so that's a quick update on that. I also attended, as I mentioned, the Stop the Hate convening that was held in Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago. I did a presentation on the commission, what our charge is, and the work that we hope to do in conjunction with our colleagues at the Civil Rights Department. It was very well received. I think that the folks there were very excited that the commission exists, as well as the California versus Hate line and resources that are available. Commissioner Che, you were very well thought of when I mentioned that you were on the commission. So many of the colleague organizations that you get to work with through Stop AAPI Hate were there. And as I said, folks are very excited about the commission and its work moving forward. And then also Vice Chair Salcedo and I were able to meet with members of the California Civil Rights Council, which Deputy Director Romero talked about earlier. They, of course, have regulatory authority over many things around civil rights in the state of California, including the Ralph Act. And so we had a great conversation with them about working together, about when we meet in person again to jointly hosting a meeting together somewhere in the state. and they have offered to support the work of the commission, especially we feel like through our policy recommendations, there needs to be review of any of the regulations that they have oversight of. So it was a great meeting. Vice Chair Salcedo, did you have any thing to add about our meeting with them or our meeting with the staff?
Thank you. I think you did an amazing job, and I appreciate all of the staff for making this meeting possible. I think it was timely and very much needed for us to come together and figure out our next steps. So thank you everyone for participating, and thank you for your report, Commissioner Roybal.
Thank you. And before I get to some housekeeping items, do staff that were there have any thing to add? All right, thank you. Before I move on to the first subcommittee, I just want to remind my fellow commissioners that it is important that we adhere to deadlines around our own reporting around Form 700 or things like that. If you have not yet completed your paperwork, please be in touch with Alec. I know Alec has emailed those of you that he needs information from. It's very important that we stay up to date around that. I know I need to now complete the one for this year. So please take the time to get those items done. And if you have questions or need assistance, please be in touch with Alec. Let's move on to the subcommittee on data and research. The report today from Commissioner Sinar.
Hi, good to see everybody. So I will make this brief and just touch on, I think, what are the 3 updates from our committee. In general, we've been exploring research partnerships and different models of generating research to provide the commission with not just provide the public as well with more high quality research on areas where we've identified gaps in our knowledge on hate crime, prevalence prevention or intervention. So 3 kind of updates within that. So the first sort of project that is furthest along, and I credit the staff entirely for making this happen, follows on Director Romero's update about the California Health Interview Survey. So he mentioned that survey, there are questions that the department has worked to include on topics including hate violence. And so we are now in the process of discussing additional questions to be asked that can get at more granular information on hate crime prevalence, including questions that would be directed to teenagers as well as adults, and that would ask about things like economic or other health impacts of hate violence. For those of you less familiar with the survey, I actually myself was not quite familiar with the survey before, but it is actually the nation's largest state health survey. It's a survey of all of Californians. It breaks down data at the county level, and it is conducted through the UCLA School of Public Health. So that is one important opportunity for additional data gathering on the hate crime prevalence and effects within California. And part of sort of our reliance on broader data beyond data that is collected by law enforcement agencies, so to broaden out what we know. Second update is more just about the kinds of other research partnerships that we're exploring. So we've been meeting with a whole range of research institutes of various kinds and centers, trying to focus on those that either have a specialization in areas related to hate or in kind of policy relevant research. So we've met with now a number of different organizations, and we're continuing to explore collaboration. So the UCLA Center on Hate, the California Policy Lab, Goldman Public Policy School, and different places where we might be able to work with researchers to plug some of those gaps. And finally, we've had a series of discussions just about what those gaps are. And I think everyone would identify some different set of gaps, but some of those that we have discussed include the need for data dashboards or websites that kind of compile a lot of hate-related data and resources for the public and for communities. So that's one piece we're looking at. We also want to do additional analyses on the role of restorative justice, responses to hate crimes, further analysis on kind of existing victim services, kind of the landscape of victim services within California and where it could be improved. And then finally, a bucket that I think is, this is speaking from my own views, but I think of many researchers as well, is one of the major gaps is in prevention and intervention, right? So just identifying what actually works to prevent hate crimes, what are effective means of reducing either the kind of prejudice that's fueling hate crimes or the acts themselves. And so that is, I think, far and away one of the most important things, especially given our role as a commission, and trying to identify policies that we should be adopting. So we are actively sort of looking at ways to generate or partner with organizations to produce and disseminate more of that research. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Any questions for Commissioner Sinar, the subcommittee? Great, thank you. I'm excited to continue to hear the fruits of that labor, right? So in particular as it pertains to the work of the commission. So thank you very much. The next subcommittee is the subcommittee on policy recommendations, and that will be, the report will be given by Commissioner Che. Commissioner Che.
Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to see everybody. And thank you to the staff and to all the commissioners for the work that you're leading. One of the most significant updates is that we have combined our policy and best practices subcommittee. I know that Commissioner Roybal will perhaps speak to other structural changes, but I did feel it was important to share it at this time because of the obvious and clear overlap between the work of those two subcommittees. And so this committee will be comprised of myself and Commissioner Cuellar. And I want to just take an opportunity to thank Commissioner Salcedo for our short but critical time. And I know we will work together through this commission in other ways. And I also want to wish Commissioner Cuellar well, because I know that she's here, even though she's not feeling well. I also have a short update. And one of the things that we established very clearly in our committee is that we would like to recommend that we use the most expansive definition of hate to also include non-criminal forms of harm, to also include institutional harm that is bias motivated, that we include incidents of hate, not just those of hate crimes. Because one of the things that I've learned through our work at Stop API Hate is that those incidents, not even though non-criminal, are harmful, and they can be predictors of more serious forms of harm. And of course, we'll learn more about that as we look through the data. I do want to thank the Commissioner Sinar with the report and how they're approaching data. We feel I know that Commissioner Cuellar and Salcedo, we talked about the importance of data, what they tell us. And what we often over-rely on is law enforcement data. And we know that there are serious limitations around that, especially given the fact that we have members of our community who do not feel comfortable reporting incidents of hate and even crimes. And so I think we have to look at the fact that there is mistrust, specifically of police, that we should look to other sources, including community-based and educational institutions that are doing this work, as well as looking to the community engagement process to learn from historically underrepresented communities, including those who are undocumented, who identify as LGBTQ, especially those who identify as trans. And then finally, it's incredibly important for us to establish baseline data. So the data, of course, is very important to understand the nature of hate in our state. It is also very important for us to do an audit of what is currently taking place within our state, including mandates via the governor's office and state agencies. We're looking at training protocols that are already in place to be able to then really be able to understand where the gaps are, and as well as looking to other jurisdictions outside of California. But what I will say is that we do know that California is leading in so many ways. As my work through Stop API Hate, one of the things that we did do is do an audit across the country, because we receive reports and incidents from across the country, and we have community members seeking assistance. Not all states have departments that are dedicated to this issue. And so it's really important, again, to be able to have that audit to establish that baseline before we expand on recommendations for the state. And I will end my report there unless Commissioner Cuellar Salcedo had anything to add.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Salcedo, did you have something to add?
No, not anything to add, but really acknowledging the amazing work led by Commissioner Choi and the amazing work that has been done through this subcommittee. So thank you so much for your leadership on this.
Thank you. I just want to echo Commissioner Che that one of the things that I heard loud and clear at the convening of the grantees a couple of weeks ago of the California Social Services Department was this reticence to report through law enforcement. I was in a small group and each of the members of the small group said they do not want to take there is resistance in particular by elders to go to police to report hate incidents or activity because number one, they're either not taken seriously or questioned about their experience, or they could possibly be undocumented and not want to reveal that to law enforcement. So they felt like there was no other vehicle to be able to report it. So I think the California versus hate stuff that Becky Monroe did at there to get folks to report things that may not rise to a level of criminality, but are still just as important. I think that message was heard by the grantees. So hopefully as that campaign continues to roll out, folks will be able to use that as a way to report those incidents. And I know the staff is very keen and excited to gather that data through that, because as you said, Commissioner Che, we just cannot rely, and I think Commissioner Levin will probably tell us that too, we cannot rely on law enforcement data. It's not enough. So thank you for that report. Let's move on to the subcommittee on recommendations for law enforcement. Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. Our commission met 3 times since our last group meeting. We met on February 9th, February 23rd, and March 7th. And you're going to hear some recurring themes between the previous commissioner's report. Seems that our work is leading us along some common pathways. So we have been inviting people into our meetings to help us with the work that we're trying to do. In February 9th, we met with Abby Browning of the California Office of Emergency Services. She's connected with law enforcement agencies throughout the state and reached out to the Chiefs Association and the Sheriff's Association. There are 58 of these associations throughout the state. They are ready and open to meet with us to learn about our commission and provide information, and they meet quarterly. So far, we have not set up a meeting with them. She also recommended and connected us with Manny Alvarez, who is the CEO of POST, which is Peace Officer Training and Standards. And I'll report a little bit more about a later meeting that we had with him in a few minutes. One of the things she mentioned to us is that it's difficult to require training past the academy level because the trainings are not mandatory. I'm sorry, the trainings are not mandatory because there's a cost involved, and the cost is often prohibitive for many smaller agencies. So we asked questions about how does training become mandatory? And we're talking specifically about training in hate incidences, hate crimes, and what's required to report. The mandatory status is either provided through legislation or by mandate from the governor. She mentioned that the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, offers free training for officers post-academy. And one of the things she recommended, Abby did, was that we might talk about requiring refresher trainings for officers post-academy. She told us that there's a state threat assessment center, which has data that includes prosecutions, but not charges and not crimes committed. She also recommended we connect with the District Attorneys Association and the Attorney General's Office to find out more information about hate crimes prosecution statistics. I am tongue-tied this morning. Our staff member, Alec, reported that he met with a representative from the Department of Justice about statistics and FBI reports coming in from California, and that he would ask Becky Monroe of California versus Hate organization about how to navigate this conversation, because she has resources for us and referrals to other agencies. Okay. On our February 23rd meeting, we met with Abby Browning of Cal OES again, Manny Alvarez, the CEO of POST, and one of his staff members, Kimberly Lyons. And Manny told us about what POST does and what POST doesn't do. He said that reporting of hate crime statistics doesn't come to POST, but is sent to the Department of Justice. POST sees an annual report, but law enforcement agencies are not required to report to POST. There's difficulty differentiating hate incidences from hate crimes. In the academy, there are 16 hours of training on discretionary topics, and this is where the training on hate crimes lies. There are no other videos or learning materials. Training and testing specifications are codified in law. Audits are done every 3 years for compliance, and the audit is subjective. There is no other post training for hate crimes and nothing required after graduating from the academy. He did mention that there is a 2019 online video course available, but it's difficult to track completions and provide credit. So far, there have been 9,500 views of it, and only 5,000 have received credit for it. And he describes this video as more suitable for group training than it is, and for conversations than it is for individual training. Local individual courses can be taken as well, but these would be outside of POST. He said he would like to see a required refresher course offered every 2 years online for convenience, but it is difficult to update a self-paced course every 2 years, and he's asked for the Museum of Tolerance to help with this. Some material needs to be reviewed every year or every other year, depending on the officer rank and legislation for that status. And he said he would look into mandates as a recommendation for the commission. We talked about continued professional training requirement, which is called CPT, requiring a minimum of 25 hours of post-certified training every 2 years. And compared to other states, this is the lower end of required training. 18 units are post-mandated for lieutenant rank and below, and 6 units are electives. Los Angeles Police Department does all of their training internally. Some is post-certified and some isn't. So it's really difficult to track what the training is across the state. It's a little easier for larger police departments to afford training than it is for smaller ones because the larger ones have a bigger budget. Verifying audits can be challenging because these are tracked not by field assignment and not by rank, and not, I'm sorry, they are tracked by rank, but not by assignment in the field and not by location. And the 2-year cycle for auditing is based on each individual officer's calendar, according to when they completed their original training and when they were hired. So there's a lot of challenges there. One question that came up is which kinds of officers are required to take these trainings? For example, we have lottery audit officers who are officers, but they're not required. So this is something that can be explored in depth a little more. Let's see, there are mandates that everyone has to take, and these are not specifically related to hate crimes and hate incidences. Required trainings include driving, firearms, use of force, arrest, and control. Manny told us it costs $100,000 to develop an online course, and customizable courses cost $300,000. He suggests incorporating courses for supervisors and chiefs, since these are the people who have to sign off on officer reports. So an officer may report an incident or an event in the field and may or may not include information about it being a hate crime or a hate incident. So the responsibility for making sure that incidents are reported correctly lies with supervisors and chiefs. And that this can be educating law enforcement officers at that level can be helpful for differentiating between hate crimes and hate incidences and making sure these things get reported. My co-chair, Commissioner Suthers, suggests having a 15-minute basic course on differentiating between hate crimes and hate incidences. Becky recommended, I thought this was kind of fun, recommended having this training offered by another law enforcement officer, providing more resources for reporting and offering a 1 hour of credit for this. And she also recommended finding and using celebrities in the law enforcement world for these videos so that they will be of greater interest to officers. Let's see, Post produces 3 videos per year and can include one on our topic of hate incidences and hate crimes. And they have the budget and the mechanisms to do this. It takes 6 to 9 months to produce a video, and they will welcome content and input from us. Our last meeting was with Ariella Lowenstein, Deputy Director of the Anti-Defamation League office in Los Angeles, who told us that working with law enforcement is part of her portfolio. And she discussed quite a bit with us about anti-Semitism, said that negative attitudes towards Jewish people increases as democratic values erode. 85% of Americans believe at least one anti-Semitic trope, and 20% of Americans believe 6 or more, which is astounding. Attitudes matter because words matter. Current conditions in our national discourse are ripe for propelling originators of hate, with some online propagandists raising significant funds for doing this. The challenge is differentiating harassment versus freedom of speech, and the challenge is how to address harassment legally. She mentioned that the Asian shooter in the Los Angeles Pico area who targeted Jews outside of synagogues specifically targeted Persian Jews. She also mentioned that people will report hate crimes and incidences to the ADL when they don't trust or feel safe reporting to law enforcement. Mostly at this time, Jewish people report these events to the ADL, although the ADL will handle reports from any group experiencing hate. ADL has a center of extremism, and she mentioned that the following legislation is in place. We have a federal hate crimes act called the James Byrd Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Law. We have a federal hate crimes reporting act, which makes mandatory reporting. Training, however, is not mandatory for officers. The ADL offers a 4-hour hate crimes class and suggested perhaps this might be a post training. Most important, she said, data drives policy and we need the data. So for making law recommendations for law enforcement, we need the data. She mentioned that district attorneys, the U.S. Attorney, the FBI, and the Los Angeles Police Department are all trying to figure out what can be done legally without chilling free speech while acknowledging the necessity of addressing harassment. She also mentioned an organization called the Lewis Registry, which stands for Law Enforcement Work Inquiry System. And their mission is to build a bridge between law enforcement and the communities officers have sworn to protect and serve, using academic research translated into social commentary and advocating for greater accountability, equal treatment, and mutual respect. She suggested they may be able to help us with getting research on the connection between law enforcement and the registry. And the basic challenge is regulating the trajectory from free speech to offensive speech to dangerous inciting speech. And that's the end of our report.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. Do any of the commissioners have a question? Commissioner Che.
Thank you, Commissioner Damsky. I really appreciate your report. This is actually a maybe just a request generally for this body that I would really greatly benefit hearing from experts, and perhaps Commissioner Sinar would be one of them, around the efficacy of hate crimes legislation. Typically, and what I want to provide some context for this is that there has been a tendency to look at hate crimes legislation, even reforming and strengthening hate crimes legislation. And I think we have to really understand the research and data around this, if in fact this is something that we should be investing in. We want to have accountability. I think the question has to be, is it primarily through our criminal legal system? It certainly has not been a deterrent. So I think I think we would benefit from having more of a presentation of hate crimes, like the efficacy of hate crimes legislation overall. So that would just be my request if I am able to make that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll bring that back to our subcommittee.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Levin.
Hi, thank you. Just one point. There is not mandatory data collection nationally. It only applies to federal agencies, for instance, like the FBI. So I just want to make sure. Now, different states may have something. Here in California, I think they're supposed to. But we do not have mandatory data collection. And with respect to deterrence, it depends on the offender. It depends on the offender. It's a fact that when Boston put together their community disorder unit, they did not, according to the head of that unit, have recidivism for 10 or 20 years. They also showed, and I refer you to a 1986 article by Wexler and Marks, and Boston was a heck of a town. There's a Pulitzer Prize winning photo in 1976 of a black man getting impaled by white supremacists holding an American flag. And they put together this hate crime unit. And they went from well over 600, almost 700, when they enforced a new law called the Massachusetts Civil Rights Act of 1979, to under 200 in just several years. So to say that there's no evidence of deterrence, I think is not exactly correct. We certainly need more research. Also, James Nolan and others looked at a cadre of different types of offenders. And one of the things that we're seeing today is greater violence with regard to these crimes. So it really depends on whether or not you have someone who's a mission offender, hardened neo-Nazi who went out and did these things again. I would say that perhaps if the hate crime laws were correctly used against this offender in Los Angeles who was shooting Jews, we wouldn't have a couple of shot Jews. So we really have to look at the types of offenders. And we really need more data on this. And that's why it's important to have everything on the table. But I think we should, as Commissioner Chase said, lean to a non-carceral type of trajectory, unless something with respect to these offenders, and there are different types of offenders, would call otherwise.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Salcedo?
Thank you so much for the acknowledgement and the ability to participate. So thank you also, Commissioner Dembski, for the great work that has happened in this. I do have a couple of concerns. One, as we know, the data that is collected is sort of like a standard way of collecting data, right? And one of the things that we know specifically for this, just documenting the experiences of trans people, as Commissioner Choi mentioned earlier, the lack of the ability to, for law enforcement to be sensitive and understanding and really supporting, right, trans people specifically. And so I'm wondering, and this is more of a question for the commission, perhaps the Civil Rights Department, to explore other venues that perhaps community-based organizations can collect some of that data, so that in some ways that data is acknowledged, right? Because we know that particularly trans people and other populations like immigrants, for instance, right, who may be undocumented, do not report incidents that happen. And so how do we make sure that we capture those situations so that we can have a better understanding of, of what happens in communities, and how do we make sure that we support those communities who are primarily impacted, right? That are sort of like, just go through the cracks, right? And I also have a question, and you may have also mentioned this. You did you did mention about the production of a video and the long it takes, and I'm just wondering if this video, suggested video, is to train law enforcement, or just plus, and also I was surprised that it said that that they said that it takes 6 to 9 months to produce a video. So yeah, if you could just speak a little more on that, it would be great.
Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. Commissioner Dembski?
Yes, I can answer that last question a little bit. The purpose of the video is for ongoing training for officers who are post-academy. So the academy level training is basic requirement for becoming a law enforcement officer. These videos that we talked about are continuing, you might consider it a continuing education class, particularly to update law enforcement officials about hate crimes, and perhaps about reporting, how to differentiate between a hate incident and a hate crime, and to make sure that these things are reported properly.
Thank you. Commissioner
Can I ask you a
Sinar?
question?
We'll get to that in a second. Commissioner Sinar?
Hi, thank you. So I wanted to first just appreciate the comments shared by each of the subcommittees so far. And I do think maybe it would be helpful for us to have more of a presentation on kind of the law enforcement issues and discussion at a future meeting. But I just wanted to briefly just provide a couple of thoughts. I think my big picture view on this is that it is incredibly important to build up non-carceral, non-law enforcement solutions, but at the same time to recognize the reality that, one, many people in communities do go to police, and we would want them to be effectively able to respond when that happens, rather than sort of that being a source of more damage or danger. And also that other accountability mechanisms at this point are so underdeveloped for the most part that while we invest in building those up, there's also the reality that for many hate crimes, people will want to go, if you want to seek some sort of accountability, there's not a lot right now that is, fully developed as, as an alternative. So I think a lot can be said about that in more detail. I just wanted to make a point that I think when we're talking about the efficacy of hate crime legislation, it's important to be specific about which legislation and for what purpose. So for example, if the question is, do hate crimes laws which increase sentences for offenders make a difference? In other words, when you move from like a 3-year sentence for assault to a 6-year sentence, does that substantially add to deterrence of people in the community? And there, I think the evidence is more skeptical in the sense that if somebody is not going to be deterred, in committing a hate crime, does the idea that the sentence is going to be marginally more? Do they even know that, for example, and will they respond to that? So I think there's much more reason to question hate crimes enhancements as an effective tool for deterrence. But that's not the same thing as asking the question, does the fact that there are prosecutions of hate crimes deter people at all? And if you think about the other world, like let's say you stopped having any kind of law enforcement response to hate crimes or any sort of carceral response, would that mean that people would be deterred less? I think probably yes. If, for example, the state of California said we're no longer going to prosecute hate crimes, I think the result, if that were public and known, might well be that people would feel a greater sense of impunity in committing hate crimes. So I guess what I just wanted to briefly say is that, I think when we're thinking about hate crime legislation, it's important to be specific. Are we talking about sentencing enhancements, or are we talking about just law enforcement responses to hate crimes as a whole? And we might well think that sentencing enhancements aren't particularly effective, but still think that in the system as we have it, the fact that law enforcement does respond to some segment of hate crimes has some deterrent value on people committing them, with all the limitations that we know of. And then I guess the last thing that I wanted to say is that in terms of thinking about law enforcement training, I don't know how we will ultimately as a commission evaluate that as a priority versus other things, but it does seem like, because at least for the more violent incidents, people will go to police. Not everybody, of course, as we know, but there are areas in which it seems that law enforcement knowledge on these issues is still really weak. And so whether it's, you can think of many different buckets about what training might be geared towards. So whether it's just sort of cultural competence to sort of, believe people when they come to them, or, information around how they should be reporting hate crimes, up the channel through the California DOJ and et cetera, or the topic that the commissioner mentioned on distinguishing between hate incidents and hate crimes. So I think, sorry, my comment has become longer than I intended, but I guess my sort of underlying thought on this is that there is a need to improve what police are doing, even as we don't see the police and law enforcement or carceral solutions as our, sole, certainly not our sole focus, and we build up other mechanisms that can be trusted and utilized both to prevent and respond to hate crimes. So that's just my general thought on this question.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Before we get to your follow-up, Commissioner Salcedo, I want to get to the commissioners who haven't spoken on this topic yet, and just remind folks we have only a few more minutes on this subcommittee report. Commissioner Cuellar.
Good morning, everybody. I just wanted to remind everybody also to, regarding the law enforcement aspect, maybe we could also reach out to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, because there are over 109 federally recognized tribes in the state of California, and many of them have their own tribal departments. And again, like Commissioner Che had said earlier, many of my community members have a lot of trauma, and they do not report to the state law enforcement. Instead, they report to my tribal police. So I would just like to again remind you, if you guys can reach out to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and see if there's any of the data that they may have. And if you need any help with that, just please let me know as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Cuellar. Commissioner Filer, did you have a comment? I saw your hand up earlier.
I think my comment will come under my report. I
Great.
realize I'm fine.
Thank
Thank
you. Commissioner Salcedo.
Yeah, just really quick. Although I understand that in some instances a video for training would perhaps support. I do want for us to think more innovatively and just, think about like what other ways. I can tell you personally that I have been doing trainings to different police departments for the past 20 years, and truly nothing has happened. I think we need to think about the institutions themselves, right? And how do we really think about changing the culture that will support individuals who are survivors of hate crimes and hate incidents, right? Or those who are perhaps victims of these incidents could be supported in a more meaningful and intentional way. And so that, as Commissioner Cuellar said, right, so that we can start eliminating the trauma that these very institutions have portrayed against the most vulnerable. And so I would want for us to think about like what other ways that we can perhaps support these institutions that have not been very good in supporting communities. And I'm not sure if a video will do that, to be completely honest.
Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo, and thank you, Commissioner Damsky, for your report. I just want to remind folks, for public comment, we'll get to that at the end of the subcommittee reports. The next subcommittee on community forums, Commissioner Filer.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Cuellar and Assistant Deputy Director Watts, as well as in partnership with the CRU team, we had our first listening session. I think we had mentioned it to you the last meeting that we were going to do less listening sessions as a way to help create and design our public forums. We were fortunate to have this first session with 12 of religious leaders from various denominations. And we received those names from Director of Policy and Discrimination Enforcement at the City of Los Angeles, from Jomana Celia Saba, as well as from Commissioner Suthers, who helped us reach out to the religious leaders in Los Angeles to create this first listening session. There will be a summary of the listening session that we will be putting together. We do not have that today. That will be made public. Not surprising, some of the themes that came up already have been mentioned by various people already from the different commissions. So I think that it's just going to reinforce some of the things that we already know, but there were some new issues that came up. We're looking to create our first public forum. We were hoping to attach that to our next commission meeting so that we could move right from the commission meeting into a public forum. Our plan at the public forum was to have presentations on research on the state of hate. Commissioner Levin and Commissioner Che, we were going to look to you to possibly have either you or somebody from your team present current research at that public forum, as well as reaching out to UCLA that has a large body of research in this area. We also were going to have our CRU team present on some of our current resources here in the state. Commissioner Quayler, if you want to add to this, anything that I've said. We also will do a summary of our listening session that we will be able to send out and present to everyone. So I think that's it. We're really moving forward, and I know we're responsible for getting 4 public forums out this year, so we want to move forward as quickly as we can to have those happen.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Questions? Great. Thank you for that report and that great work.
And the only comment that I did not make earlier was, I think in looking at our police and sheriff departments, the one thing I would encourage all of us is the departments that are successful, that people are feeling comfortable to go to and feel are responding, would be very valuable to look at what it is about those departments that seems to be working.
Great. Thank you. The next subcommittee, Commissioner Che, did you do both your subcommittee reports in one, or did you need more time for the best practices?
I did.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. There will not be a report today from the subcommittee on funding, but before we move on to the action item around subcommittees, I want to see if there is any public comment.
There is a public comment from someone attending, Greg Duzier, and I think you're able to unmute and speak.
Hi, Greg. Welcome. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. And Rachel, thank you for pronouncing my name right. It rarely happens. I'm with the ARC of California, the Developmental and Intellectual Disability Group. Couple of comments concerning the law enforcement report. There is now mandatory training, one mandatory training for law enforcement officers beyond the academy. It was a bill that Assemblyman Gabriel passed in 2021. I'm not sure how much that's being carried out, but it is the law. Secondly, the research shows that I've seen that there are 2 factors that actually do influence officers the way they carry out their work. One is formal training, and the other is their formal policies, also called general orders or protocols. There's a bill in the legislature this year, Assembly Bill 449 by Assemblyman Ting, which directly affects both of those. It mandates that every law enforcement agency have a formal policy. Most do already. Most of them, many of them are pretty good. Then none of them are as good as we'd like to see, but they do have policies. And this would mandate that every agency have a policy. And the other is that part of the policy would include a schedule for the mandated training that the Gabriel bill mandated, that so that it adds some teeth to the requirement that they have mandatory training. Finally, concerning legislation, I wanted to second what Commissioner Sinar said, that some legislation has proven to be, and this is not just in the field of hate crimes, but in the field of anything concerning legislation, has proven to be not very useful, to say the least, because the people who are supposed to carry it out don't carry it out. But when people do carry it out, when Post carries out what it's required to do and so forth, it can be very, very effective. And I hope we'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your public comment, Greg. We appreciate it. I now want to move on to the action item that's on the agenda regarding the subcommittees. Commissioner Che alluded to this earlier. After examining the scope of the different subcommittees, one of the things I talked to Commissioner Che about was combining the subcommittee on policy recommendations and the subcommittee on best practices and solutions from other jurisdictions. There's been some significant overlap there, and anything that that the best practices committee would do would go to the policy recommendation subcommittee. anyway. And so I know Commissioner Che has talked to Commissioner Cuellar and Commissioner Salcedo about this. And as Commissioner Che said, there'll be one new subcommittee or one subcommittee combined for both of those. And Commissioner Che and Commissioner Cuellar will be on that subcommittee. So I will entertain a motion to approve combining those subcommittees.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Salcedo seconds. Any discussion or questions from the commission? Thank you. Is there any public comment?
Apologies. I don't believe so. Mr. Dozier, I think your hand is still raised, but I'm not sure if that's from the previous comment. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any further discussion from the commissioners? All right, Alec, will you call the roll?
Sure. Roybal,
Yes.
Salcedo,
Yes.
Che,
Yes.
Cuellar,
Yes.
Dubsky,
Yes,
Filer,
Yes.
Levin,
Yes,
Sonar,
Yes.
and Southers. Okay, so that's 8 ayes.
Thank you so much. That passes. Before we move on to Commissioner Levin, are you ready to do your informational presentation?
Alex, do you have the PowerPoint ready?
Alec, you're on mute if you're talking.
You can't hear me?
Alec, did you hear Commissioner
I'm
Levin?
sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, Alec, do you have the PowerPoint ready?
Yeah, I can get it ready.
It took a bit, so I would like us to take a break now before we get to the informational presentation.
Thank you.
11. So it is currently 10:11. Let us reconvene in 10:12. Let us reconvene it. Let's just reconvene at 10:20. So we'll reconvene at 10:20 a.m.
Thank you so much.
Everyone. Hi, everyone. We'll get started in just a couple of minutes.
Commissioner Roybal, you're going to send me the dates that you're in Los Angeles?
I will. I'll send you an email, Commissioner Filer.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Levin, as we get ready to reconvene, I'll give you, you have an hour, so I'll give you time marks at 30 minutes and then 45 minutes and then 5 minutes. How does that sound?
I hope not to take the whole hour, but we'll see if there's questions and things like that.
Sure.
And thank you again.
I think we're, there's definitely a hunger for this data. So I think many of the commissioners are excited to hear it. Okay, it is 10:25. Let us reconvene. Welcome back, everyone. I want to move to the next piece on our agenda, which is an informational presentation and discussion, hate crime trends, a changing threat, and invisible records by our colleague, Commissioner Brian Levin. Commissioner Levin gave us a little bit of a preview at the last commission meeting around this. So Commissioner Levin, it's all yours.
Thank you so much for having me. And let me just say one thing first, and that is sitting here with my fellow commissioners and the staff of the Civil Rights Department. I want the people out there who may be watching this to know these folks are the best of California. We bring to this something that the majority of states do not. And the fact that we have these discussions in public, I think is such a wonderful thing. And there's too many of you for me to thank personally, but please, thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you're doing. There were folks who said we didn't need a commission like this. As hate crimes were growing, and as we saw federal agencies and sometimes congressional agencies, depending on who's in charge, ignore the issue. So whatever divergences we might have, we learn from each other, but I'll tell you what, thank God that we have this here in this state. And to all my fellow commissioners and to the wonderful CRD staff, heartfelt, you are the best of our state. Thank you. Let me go straight into it. As I said before, we have a record. If we go next slide, I'll show you what I mean. Look at this. Now, my fellow commissioners and other researchers point out that there are data limitations with all kinds of data collection methods. So for instance, with regard to hate crime, we have very small numbers that end up getting reported. So from anywhere from about a little over 4,091, but they didn't have that many agencies participating, all the way up to just under 11,000 for 2021. The data just came out last Monday from the FBI. Remember I said they need to supplement it? Well, when I met with them earlier this year, I politely asked for them to do so, and I'm glad that they did. So there are limitations on any type of data collection, whether it's done by law enforcement or whether it's done by NGOs. Some of the issues on the law enforcement side relate to misidentification. I worked with a PhD who wrote an article for BuzzFeed where we went to cities and we looked at ones that said they had no hate crimes and decent sized ones like Hialeah, Florida, Irving, Texas, and other places. And through FOIA requests, Dr. Alhouse got the actual incident reports. And if you read them, you would be shocked. by what did not make it in. When people used epithets that were clear and redundant, yet these weren't classified. So there are significant issues with underreporting to law enforcement, and in particular to various communities. So for instance, in 92 or 93, I went before the state Senate and asked for undocumented people, that's the language we used then, to be able to be included in our hate crime laws. And I also asked that there be some degree of protection, similar to what they did in San Diego and what they have in Los Angeles, Special Order 40, where if you're a crime victim, you're undocumented, you will not be turned over to federal authorities. You know, we have various communities for a variety of reasons, and it's worse in other states, because in other states, if there's certain issues with regard to privacy and lack of legal protections for certain communities. So there are limitations across the board. Now, with regard to NGOs, they do a great job and they complement a lot of what we do. I left out one of the slides, one slide that showed, for instance, something similar to what our friends at Stop AAPI Hate did. And one of the things when I was helping the committee on State of Hate, I said we have to have, for instance, folks from NGOs, and specifically said Stop AAPI Hate. So what's great about the NGO stuff? Well, we can get sometimes more or less closer to real time, depending on the jurisdiction. Some departments are very good, some are not. And you know what we did? We went back and we looked at, and this is why you can't have any one piece of data control. You have to have a whole series of data from different venues. And what we found, for instance, with SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, disclaimer, back in the mid-90s, I worked there. What we found was when we looked at day-by-day ticks, for instance, in FBI reported hate crime or even municipally reported hate crimes, it very much lined up with what we saw going up with NGO reports. So that was very useful for me. And that's why I knew, for instance, when we had like Stop AAPI Hate doing their efforts, that it was going to be complementary and very good. What's some of the problems though? Well, some of the problems is that anyone who's worked in the civil rights field knows that sometimes there's turnover with regard to expertise as different NGOs and advocacy groups take other folks. And there's rotation. There's also issues with respect to consistent definitions across NGOs and across with law enforcement. There's also issues with funding. Sometimes there's not enough to keep it going. Sometimes I think there's also something where when things are not going up, folks don't want to fund things as much, so it's hard to keep that consistent. So we need consistency across the board. But anyway, one of the things that I said was when the FBI report came out in December, showing a 12% decrease, that's just not true. If you added what was left out of New York State, if you added what was left out of California, almost 1,700, and Chicago, you know, that puts you into a record. And it turns out we had 1,000 more reported hate crimes than just when we added those states. And I think what's so interesting, and if we could go on to the next slide. What is so interesting is that even with, bear with me, back last decade, we were actually in a time where we were getting around 16,000 agencies, then it went more down to about 15, but with a general 92 to 95% participation rate. The problem is about 88 to 90% of that participation is someone writing on a Form 0. So we know that there's massive underreporting. There's also a complementary system that we have within the federal government, but it's slow. and that's the Bureau of Justice Statistics. They do victimization surveys. They can be very helpful to get what's called the dark number with respect to unreported crimes. There's some limitations with that. They reach out to residences. The victim has to be 12 years old or older. It doesn't include homicide. So I think the key is a composite set of data, just like, you know, when you have something like the S&P 500, it's not a perfect indicator of what, for instance, companies are doing, but a fairly decent one, particularly with trends. And here's what we saw for 20 through 21 for FBI reported hate crimes. We saw a significant increase across the board. And one of the things that was terrifying, even when you use law enforcement data, for instance, and one of the things I think was so effective, for instance, when the COVID-19 Hate Crime Act was up, they not only had wonderful research coming out of NGOs, but they also had other data as well, including some of ours. And both were used in the promulgation of that legislation. And it was complementary. And you know what it showed? It showed an explosion of violence against our Asian American community here in the United States. As you can see, there were a lot of increases almost across the board in 2021. Let's go to just the next slide, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on the next slide, but if we could, yeah, this is the actual report. By the way, you will read in some of the newspapers that there was an 11.6% rise. That's not true. It was a 31% rise to a record, because this is the table that we make our decisions on. And you know how I know? Because I checked with the FBI when it was released. And look at this. We found in our research, which came out last year, when we were saying we're having a record with regard to certain types of violence, particularly what is striking the AAPI community. And what we saw was, in just 21 cities, we saw more anti-Asian hate crimes than the FBI ever collected in the history of their data collection efforts going 3 decades. So we knew there was going to be an explosion, and it was going to be a record. But what was it? Well, it was astoundingly horrible. It's horrific. And each one of these numbers represents a victim here. And we can't forget that. The previous record for anti-Asian hate crimes was 356 in 1996. We hit 746 in the FBI data, and plus a significant number affecting anti-Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. So it's terrifying. Let's go on to the next one, so you can see something about reporting. This is from the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and what it shows is, from their victimization studies, those that actually reported hate crimes to police in mid-decade, last decade, started to outnumber those who don't. But that's not going to be true, for instance, of certain communities that might have language, cultural barriers. They, one of the things that people say to me all the time is, what about hate crimes committed by law enforcement, right? And that doesn't get counted. And if you look at these numbers, look at that. If you put that together, you're talking around, the most recent data showed that, according to Bureau of Justice Statistics, 200,000 respondents said that they were that they thought they were victims of hate crimes. So there's a big gap. But what the numbers are really good at, particularly law enforcement numbers, when you get at least a somewhat reliable consistency, even if it's terrible underreporting, particularly those places that have had experience for decades, have model policies, have 2 tiers reviews, and particularly for certain types of offenses, we get a decent idea of who's getting attacked and when. And that gives us something actionable, even though we don't have, whether we're NGOs, law enforcement, or academia, limitation-free data. Let's go to the next one and give you an idea of what we can do. This shows us some of the trends that we're seeing. And by the way, it got cut off at 2020. Why? Because the FBI still hasn't supplied us data for time series analysis. Last year was a real debacle with regard to hate crime data collection, but at least we have a top line number. And these are monthly reports. And you look at the end there, what we're seeing is hate crimes are staying elevated for longer. And I think that's due in part to social media and the political world we're in. If we could just go to the next slide. One of the things that we did, and this is really useful, this is good use of law enforcement data, even when it's limited. And by the way, if you were to look back, for instance, at other communities, you'll see that there were certain periods of time where we're getting virtually nothing. We understand that. But what we saw here, and what I think is so interesting about that increase going up and staying high for longer, look at that bottom line. That's all hate crimes. In June 2020, around the George Floyd time, and I'm going to show you some slides where we take other social science data. We're not just relying on this. These stayed elevated into October, so that for 5 months, every month was more than any month the previous decade. We are in a new era with regard to the prevalence of hate crime and with regard to the violence. If we can go to another slide. Look at this horrible, this community is suffering. Yet when the data came out, it showed in December, it was so incomplete because they only had about 64% participation compared to the usual low to mid 90s. And let me say something. This is only with about 80% participation with regard to agencies. This is horrific. And we have to have actionable data wherever it comes from, so we don't have this invisible suffering, at least within the broader community. If we could go down to the next slide, that would be great. And let's look at a disaggregation of anti-Asian hate data. Look at that in March and April. Of course, there weren't only 44 or 43 incidents. That's ridiculous. But what we do know is that that represented at the time a record. And that's important. What we don't get to see is 2021, unfortunately, because the FBI does not have, they only have the top line now. They haven't been able to put it even in a way where we could take a pile of it and try and disaggregate it and comb through it. They don't even have that yet. But what we saw, if you look, there was a decline, right? And it got very low in December. In January, we saw an explosion, and that's going to be January 2021. We saw an explosion, and that's going to be a record. If we could continue. Anti-Black hate crime, as you can see, in 2020, had a period of elevation around that same time. So in other words, driven by anti-Black and other hatreds, we saw all hate crimes get elevated then. Going into 2021, we saw only the second time that anti-African American hate crime is recorded by the FBI went over 3,000 in a year. It was a terrible year. Anti-Latino hit a record. Anti-Sikh doubled in 2021 and hit a multi-year high for that group. It only got taken out as a separate group in 2015 officially. But according to FBI data, that makes anti-Sikh hate crime now, at least in 2021, the second most common type of religious hate crime, displacing for the first time since 2001 Muslim folks. So that's it. The data is just terrifyingly bad, and it's also incomplete. In other words, we have lower participation than we did percentage-wise in the previous decade, but we're hitting records. As I said, anti-Latino also hit a record along with anti-Asian. If we can move on, next slide. Anti-Jewish. Anti-Jewish hate crimes and anti-Muslim hate crimes actually went down in 2020, but the prejudice did not. What happened was a lot of the cities that have a higher proportion or the highest proportion of Jewish folks and Asian folks were shut down during parts of the year. But what was interesting is the attacks against Asian folks still went up. And why was that? Well, a lot of attacks were on lone people, individuals, right? And also on places of business that did remain open. However, mass transit and houses of worship had far more limited people using them, so less ability to get in contact with folks. And of course, it shot up in 2021 and 2022. We have a new report just out, literally like today, that's showing a 27% increase in anti-religion hate crimes, as well as a 28% increase in anti-Semitic crimes. Keep your eyes open. ADL's coming out with a report tomorrow. And it's undoubted, it has to be a record, because I can't imagine that with the data that we were seeing from last year, that it went down, because our data is showing anti-Semitic hate crime went up in 2022, and anti-Muslim hate crime went up a little less, 16%. If we could just go to the next slide. What I wanted to also do is not just show you these heat maps, but take 10 years worth of data basically and show you who under and again, we don't have time to go over the limitations of every data set. But when you have certain states, some rural states, a lot of southern states, we're actually getting an underrepresentation of African Americans. And one interesting point that I'd like to mention is African Americans were declining from 96 through 2019 as a proportion of all reported hate crime. That ended in 2020 when we saw that high elevation, and certainly it's going to change with regard to 2022. If we could go, next one's blank, by the way, so just skip over that. And here's anti-Muslim hate crime. There's no way there were only 110 in 2020, but here's the thing. We had a 38% increase in 2021 for anti-Muslim, and we had a 20% increase FBI for anti-Semitic. But our research, which concentrated in the cities where Jews are more likely to live, had a much higher increase. And we saw that. We saw that in 2020 when we reported an increase in anti-Asian violence that was significantly more than what the FBI finally came out with. Let's go to the next slide. If we could go to the next slide. Thank you. Local demographics does play a role. By the way, see that? This is 2022, the latest data available anywhere. Anti-Jewish in New York City alone was more than every city in the country total, except for LA and New York City. But the New York, New Jersey metro area has about 31% of the nation's Jewish folks. So that's why you're going to see that. You see a lot of anti-Asian hate crimes as well. Previously, we were just getting a trickle of reports. And now look at this. Second in New York. Just terrible, terrible data. When I say terrible, I mean terrible for, you go through it and you're like, these are real people here. If we could go to the next slide. This is what we saw in 21, 22 in the cities that we looked at throughout the country. And anti-Black was the most common, anti-Jewish next. Now you'll see that there is a decline in anti-Asian hate crimes. You might go, oh wow, great, game over, we solved the problem, no more prejudice. No way, no way. Even with the declines that we saw, okay, just from the cities that we looked at, okay, it would still be more just for the cities that we looked at than any year pre-pandemic going back to the 9/11 period, okay? So when you're talking about, one of the things that we've seen, for instance, is that over the last 3 years, we had such big increases in anti-Asian violence, anti-African-American violence, and even against the LGBTQ community, that we saw some kind of leveling, but we're now seeing different othering coming in. So for instance, anti-gay male and anti-lesbian remained relatively stable, but folks were now going after mixed LGBTQ and specifically gender nonconforming and transgender. We had a 27% in transgender and much more in gender nonconforming. So when you look at 1 year, you really have to spread it out. That's another problem. No matter where you're getting the data, you want to have some kind of track record. And what I'm saying is that it doesn't look good. Our latest data for all the cities that we're looking at in the top 10 show single digit increases. So we don't know whether or not that's going to extend to the whole country, but about 85% of the time it seems to. And in the top 10 cities, we have an even higher percentage. If we could just move down to the next slide. This is a composite of who is getting attacked in the major cities that we were able to get data for. Now, you'll see it's a bit more diverse, and it does vary a bit, not necessarily the order, but the proportions. And what we saw was anti-African American, number 1, anti-Jewish, number 2, anti-gay male, number 3, and then we saw a cluster between the mixed LGBTQ, anti-Latino, anti-Asian, and also anti-white. Now remember, these tend to be the cities with the better responses. But the top 50 cities are different demographically than the nation as a whole. They're more diverse. They're less white. Whites are minorities, and there's double the proportion of Jewish folks. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great. And except for Phoenix, which has some weird reporting issues, what we saw when we looked at the top cities for 2022, the largest, we saw records or near records in just about every one, going back to the early 90s when hate crime data collection first started. That's another unfortunate aspect of this, but I wanted to show it to you. Let's go to the next one so we can look at what we found. So this is what we found, what I was alluding to before. It's kind of a de-evolution of how these things get targeted. So the biggest increase that we saw was an anti-other race. And this is exactly going into the xenophobic kind of garbage that we have going on. What else? Look at this. Mixed group, LGBT, mixed group. Whereas the attacks against gay males and lesbians, we may either went down slightly or were kind of flat. So what I think is so interesting is the hate doesn't just disperse, it gets redirected. That same kind of homophobic hate, xenophobic hate, religious hate, and of course, anti-Jewish, up 28%, anti-transgender, up 27%, and anti-white. Now, remember, because of biases, I think maybe some of this anti-white, an officer might, in a department that's predominantly white, might be more likely to report anti-white, but we have seen increases in that as well. Let's go to the next slide. So here's anti-religious hate crime all the way through, and what we saw is if we narrowed down just to the religion, anti-Jewish and anti-Muslim went up. So we don't have enough data. Well, we do. We have some data with respect to the Sikh community, but it's so small that the numbers are so small. They did show an increase, but we don't know how that's going to pan out later. Let's go to the next one. This is another representation. Now, again, because Jews are more clustered in these larger major metro areas. In the top 21, they're about 4.4%. The rest of the country, overall, 2%. 78% of religion attacks were against Jews. But we've been seeing a decline generally in the percentage of religious hate crimes that are directed against Jews. Not necessarily because people are digging Jews a lot more, it's just they're attacking more faiths, or at least those people from those faiths are reporting more. If we could go next slide, that'd be great. This is really important. I was at a national meeting last week, and they showed charts with respect to each year anti-LGBTQ legislation. When we have people going to political conferences saying that transgenderism needs to be eradicated. Okay, my father was an American POW in Nazi Germany who was about to be murdered. They used the same language about eradicating Judaism too. When you talk about eradicating transgenderism, what you're talking about is eliminationist language that targets people. And we have irresponsible influencers, celebrities, and politicians that should know better. Everyone pictured here was murdered last year. Every single one of them. And we couldn't even fit all their pictures up. Okay? So when we're talking about these numbers, the one thing, when I go throughout the country, and I talk about hate crime, there are homeless people, there are transgender people, young gay people who are kicked out of their homes who come up to me and say what mean streets there are. We're better than this. And let me show you what I mean when we can combine different data sets. Let's go to the next chart. This is from our friends at Princeton, ACLED. This kind of garbage online and in the streets, we're seeing, look at that explosion of protests against the transgender and gender nonconforming and also just LGBTQ mix, right? Because bigots will extend their prejudice to whoever's proximate. And we're seeing more of that going on now. This is what happens. This is what happens when you have dozens of transgendered residents of our country getting murdered because these stereotypes that are promoted online and in these kinds of protests and by politicians end up being connected to violence in the streets. You want more proof? Let's combine that limited law enforcement data with some online social science data. back in the day, we're moving so fast. And let me tell you something. I'd love for us to do something with respect to these social media companies who are getting away with a lot. 4chan during that period was a real hub for bigoted activity. What we ended up doing was normalizing the data, putting it on top of each other, and let's see what we saw. And myself, James Nolan, and a fellow named Andrew Thompson, who's a computer data scientist. Remember, my son doesn't trust me with a remote. We all got together, and what I'm saying to you is, when you have people with different skill sets, as long as they are committed, you get really good research. Look at that. You know what that spike is? The red spike are hateful posts on 4chan. How do we pick them out? We use vile epithets, which I'm not going to repeat here, but the kinds that your mom would say, I don't want to ever have you say that again. And then we put FBI reported hate crime. Look at that. It peaked in November, at that time, in November 2016. And if I went back to one of those heat maps, what you'd see is that November 2016 was the worst month since the first anniversary of 9/11. And the day after the elections was the worst day going back 13 years. Let's move on a little bit.
Commissioner Levin, you have about 25 minutes left.
Oh, great. Now let's disaggregate it and look who was getting attacked. Look at that. Leadership matters, words matter, and one of the things I hope this commission will do is at some point be able to get out there, because one of the things about having laws, there's a beautiful article in the New York Review of Books about the significance of the '64 Civil Rights Act. So when people talk about sentencing enhancements and this and that, we'll get to that later. But the symbolic significance is incredibly important, and I am incredibly proud to have represented a lot of California groups 30 years ago to protect the constitutionality of these enhancements, because we need every tool on the table. We don't have to use them all, but you know what? For some violent people, I think we have to review that. James Nolan and Jim Bennett wrote an article where they said there were different types of offenders, and the deterrence level would vary. I want to know how we get to that. Because it's very difficult to measure this kind of stuff. But as I said, Wexler and Marks did an incredible article back in '86 where they showed that when there was a hate crime unit, a new civil rights law in Massachusetts, and I'll tell you something, Blacks and Latinos and Asians were getting beat up on the streets. There's controversy recently at the Golden Globes because Mark Wahlberg, who had committed a hate crime as a young person, was at this award ceremony where Asian American filmmakers were getting recognized. But what I'm saying is, you had buses with motorcycle escorts in Boston at that time. It was a place where hate crime ran amok, and they dropped the numbers of reported hate crimes from well above 600. Down to under 200. But we don't have a lot of data on the other side too. Why? Because there aren't a lot of rehabilitative programs. And again, rehabilitation is an important goal of the criminal justice system. It's not only deterrence. Incapacitation for truly, truly dangerous people. There's also some kind of communal disdain for these kinds of acts. I don't want to call them retribution, but that's something that we look at, and also restitution to victims. So I think the folks are right, and I love these discussions. I think they're very healthy. Let's go on to the next slide. This shows you something else, and disregard the ad thing. Okay, what we did is we looked at Russian interference by taking, in the 2016 timeframe, over 3,500 paid ads on Facebook by Russia. They call it the IRA, and it's part of an offshoot of kind of Russian intelligence. And they had people putting racist, homophobic, and other kinds of memes up on Facebook. And this shows you that in the run-up to the election, out of all their disruptive ads, they really put their money down on racial ads as hate crimes were going up. So the red represents hate crimes and the blue represents the Russian ad buying. And you can see as it went up, so did hate crimes. I'm not saying the Russians caused this, but they're smart enough to know what's a hot button. Let's go to the next one. This is what I mean about taking law enforcement data and putting it together. Words matter. Whatever you think of President Bush, I think the highlight of his tenure was on September 17th, 2001, when he said it was un-American to attack our Muslim friends and neighbors. Hate crimes dropped the next day, and they continued that decline. In fact, they fell by 2/3 the next year. Let's go to another slide. But look what happened during the election time 2015, 2016. As you can see, November, there were terror attacks in Paris. Then on December 2nd, an attack that hit our community. 5 days later, candidate Trump proposed his vile, xenophobic, bigoted, horrific Muslim ban proposal. And by the way, what happened to that party? What happened to that party where the head of that party previously said people who attack Muslims should be ashamed of themselves? This is the era we're in. And as you can see, hate crimes against Muslims and Arabs went up. There you go. That's how we can use different types of data. Can we just go another slide real quick? Let's look at something else. And please, my mom who just passed, seriously would have washed my mouth out with soap with regard to any of these words. So if I offend anyone, please, that's not what I mean to do. But we saw similar things with regard to anti-Asian hate crime. And by the way, it went up even more. The chart got cut off because we don't have the FBI data. But our data shows a real explosion in the first quarter of 2021. It was just terrible across the country. And what did we see? Now, you have to kind of move over that bottom chart. But we saw two things happen. One, an increase in COVID hospitalizations. Then around March 8th and March 10th, the Secretary of State and a congressperson used stigmatizing language against our Asian friends and neighbors. And look what happened. And on March 16th, the president started doing it and continued it. And what did we see? Anti-Asian hate crimes peak around the last days of March into the first days of April. So I'm not saying that this kind of rhetoric completely causes things, but it certainly correlates in a way that is just not chance. Let's go to another slide real quick. Let's look at something else. Let's look at, remember I showed you that chart where we talked about that elevated time, right? That elevated time in 2020. This is when we saw the N-word, if you look at on top, the N-word go up on Twitter after the George Floyd lynching. That very big spike at the end is anti-Black hate crimes in the second chart. The third one is from our friends at ACLED who kept track of the protests. So when we heard statements, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. When we had the president holding a Bible upside down after clearing out peaceful social justice protesters. You want to hear something? Those were among the 2 worst days ever for anti-Black hate crime. So it does make a difference. Leadership makes a difference. And every one of you on this commission, let me tell you, I really don't care whether we diverge a little bit on some policy issue, we say we need to research more. Your service is so important to our state. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I knew that we had such great people coming on to this, I'd say I would have tried harder, but I tried as hard as I could. Let's go to another slide real quick. So I want to take questions on this. As I was saying, when we compared overall violent crime to hate crime, look at that. It's going up, and it's going up every year. Aggravated assaults are going up, and assaults are going up. So when we see aggravated assaults, that's a big deal. Let's go to another slide real quick, because I think we have some prosecution stuff, and I want to. Yeah, here's some more. It just shows that we're seeing an upswing, and that upswing is continuing into this decade. This is Bureau of Justice Statistics, but look, they do victimization surveys, but their data is too old. That's a big limitation. Let's go next slide. Here's another representation that's Attorney General addressing hate crimes at the DOJ. But you can see that shift up, and it continues to go up. In other words, the aggravated assaults by year. Let's go next slide, because we have limited time. Prosecutions. Okay, here's the thing about why I thought in 30 years ago. Oh my gosh, I'm that old. 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. 31 years ago, the civil rights community wanted to push hate crime enhancements. They don't get used. They don't get used. In other words, the dilution of this stuff is we at least want police in the community to respond to them and not have them be invisible. So yeah, I mean, look, the carceral model has not been particularly successful in all aspects of crime, but look at how many end up getting convicted. When DA Gascon was going to pull hate crime penalty enhancers, not use them in the county of Los Angeles, I sent an email to his chief of staff and said, if you're going to do that, I'm going to ask the Department of Justice of the state to intervene, which they can legally do, to take all felonies. And you know what? We had a meeting, and he said, okay. And you know what we found out? How many felonies were in the pipeline at that time? 3. There was one racial attack by a vile white supremacist with his partner there, using certain words which I'm not going to use, but saying white lives matter among others, while striking their vehicle and trying to get at them with a metal shovel. The 2 other felonies were attempted murders of transgender people. So we're not seeing a lot of prosecutions to begin with. That being said, I think there's legitimate concern that when there might be folks who are getting prosecuted from various communities. We saw in Utah, they added law enforcement, and when someone made a snide remark, when they were getting a ticket, they were arrested. So yeah, there's abuse, but that's where we are. Let's go to one more slide real quick.
We have about 15 more minutes.
Got it. San Jose for 2022, we showed a decline, but here's what we saw, done by group. So there's San Jose. Let's go to the next slide real quick. There's Los Angeles, anti-Black, and anti-gay, and anti-Asian continue, along with Jewish and Latino, to be the most common. And remember, and this is why this is such a beautiful thing, we all stand together on this commission. The attacks are going up almost across the board. And the kind of declines that we saw, I'm not going to put the slide on, because let's just go one more slide. It's not another city. There's San Francisco. And just one more. This I referenced before. The ADL is coming out with their report tomorrow. Look at assaults. That's a key number to look at. I think you're going to see terrifying numbers out of the ADL, because we're seeing a 28% increase. Let's go to one last slide. And there's, for instance, the top targeted group, again, perennially across the country, and in most but not all of the cities that we track, anti-Black hate crime. So yes, these data have limitations, but the great thing about them is we're about a year more rapid than the FBI in getting this out, and the trends tend to register when the FBI comes out, and also when our friends at NGOs come out with data. So what I think is great about having this data is that when an NGO comes out with something and says, hey, our community is being attacked, and they'll say, oh, well, maybe people are fudging or there's double counting or whatever it is. We say, hey, you know what? It matches. And what we did when we took the Southern Poverty Law Center stuff, it matched day by day, not only the numbers, kind of like what I was showing with the actual crime reports, but also who was getting attacked. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. We're going to do great things together, and I want to meet all of you. We have a new report out. If you go to @ProfLevin on Twitter, which is also a vile cauldron of bigotry now, you will see our full religion report. And you can go down and scroll by various cities as well, because we have all the bias motives, not just religions, in that report. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin, for all this great information. We have about 10 minutes left for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll start with Commissioner Filer.
Yes, Commissioner Levin, thank you so much. This research is incredibly valuable. And the historical data you provided is really great. I do have a question about, and maybe I missed it. Is there any data specific to the homeless population and violent attacks?
Thank you so much for asking. We actually do. Washington, D.C. and Seattle count attacks against homeless people. I was on the board of the National Coalition for the Homeless. I tried to get it added to California's law, and the District Attorneys Association and the ADL showed up to try and argue against it. We had Southern Poverty Law Center on our side. We need to add homeless. For many years, the National Coalition for the Homeless had counted, and we're talking about 2 decades, how many homeless people were killed in circumstances where there was no drugs, no pecuniary gain, and no personal animus, and done by domiciled people. And those murders, basically up until the time that we saw this horrible phenomenon of these mass killings, those murders outnumbered all the other hate crime categories combined for almost all those years. One of the things that we've seen, just as far as while we're talking murders, we've had a decline in hate and extremist murders last year, but there were 4 anti-religious murders. But yes, homeless. And that's why when we went before the legislature, I said we're going to use a definition that's not wedded to law enforcement specifically. So yes, I would love to see homeless people covered. Back in 2001 or 2002, the state Senate did a study, and it indicated that homeless people were victimized more in the course of a year than suburban white folks are in the course of their adult lifetime.
Thank you, Commissioner Filer. Commissioner Chang.
Yes, thank you. I want to also thank you, Commissioner Levin, for this important presentation. I did want to just lift up maybe perhaps a few items. One is I do think it is important that we look at all data sets that are available to us. And this idea of a composite data is really important. And obviously one of the reasons why we started Stop API Hate. And I do think it's really important to lift up the fact that the Black community has consistently been the largest group that has been targeted of hate since we started collecting data. And I just want to name that publicly and for the record. But I want to go to this issue of misclassification as well. We just commemorated the 2nd anniversary of the Atlanta area shooting. And I want to lift that up as an example that for many of us in the community, we believe wholeheartedly that the shooter targeted Asian women and targeted Asian businesses. And yet he did not say a single word as he attempted to murder Asian people and target these businesses. And so we do have these challenges of the burden of proof and oftentimes how difficult hate crimes prosecutions are. And especially in the Asian community, there may not be a symbol that one could easily recognize as a symbol of hate. And so I think these are things that I think we need to take into account. Secondly, I do feel as though we've been very careful at Stop API Hate to avoid making statements like there's an uptick or there's been a decrease, because what we know, in fact, is that many times our community members don't know where to report or are hesitant to report. And so we have been very hesitant to even suggest when, incidents are going up and down. We continue to say that one person that expresses or reports should be of concern. So for example, after the Atlanta area shooting, we saw a huge spike in our reporting center. And that is just because we were in the media and people knew to find us, not necessarily a reflection that just in that instance, there were instances of hate. And then I do feel as though it's, I appreciated the fact that you highlighted the political climate and environment. We know that when we have politicians and elected officials scapegoating, whether it's public health, national security, or economic, our communities are directly impacted. It is almost like putting a target on our backs. So I encourage this kind of comprehensive analysis, because data is only data, and we have to have informed analysis, and that can only happen by working across sectors and especially with community groups who have who are closest to the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Che. Commissioner Sanar?
Thank you. And thank you also to Commissioner Levin for his presentation, and also Commissioner Che for, I think, the points that she just raised. A couple of quick things. One, just on the homelessness point, I just wanted to flag that we've been invited to join the research sessions that the UCLA Center on Hate has been putting out. And the session scheduled for tomorrow involves a research team that's working specifically on hate directed against the unhoused population. So that might be of interest to folks. The other thing, I also had wanted actually to just uplift the findings about the connection between high-level political speech and rhetoric targeting our communities and hate incidents. There's actually a growing amount of research showing that, yes, it absolutely matters what high-level folks in office are saying. So that's like, there are a lot of things we don't know from research on hate crimes, but that we're seeing again and again studies from all kinds of places showing how much that speech matters in terms of what happens on the ground. And then two kind of just quick final points on sort of what I think we can and can't take from some of the data that Commissioner Levin shared. And this is, I think, fully consistent with his presentation. The first is that, we know that the overall numbers that are reported through these law enforcement data sources are far, far lower than the actual incidents. So, and I think we're kind of sort of all agree that they're not going to represent the full scale of what's happening. They're very under-inclusive. At the same time, and I think this is one of the things that some of Professor Levin's data is about trends, and the data can be more consistently collected data over time can be better at showing trends. Not perfect, and partly for some of the reasons Commissioner Che mentioned, because you can get surges that are sometimes related to greater reporting than to greater incidents. But generally, the data of the kind that Professor Levin is sharing is better at showing trends, like year by year kind of deviations, than it is in capturing any kind of absolute numbers. So that was just one point on kind of what we take or how we interpret the data. The other thing I just want to caution about is not taking the absolute numbers in any given year to sort of say which groups are most or least targeted. Partly because some groups are smaller than others. So for example, you might show that anti-trans violence, if you sort of do that comparison thing, might rank 20th. But, if the community is much smaller than some other community, then it might mean that your actual risk as a trans person of being subject of hate violence is much greater, but the absolute numbers aren't going to reflect that. And then second, some groups are probably more likely to report incidents to hate to law enforcement than others. So for example, if you see large numbers of anti-white hate crime, it doesn't mean that they didn't happen, but we need to keep in mind that or similarly across other groups, that the rate of reporting is going to vary by different groups. So I just want to say that it shouldn't sort of be like who is suffering most, and that's not to sort of undermine the point that there's a lot of hate that's getting completely ignored, like the fact that anti-African American hate violence remains the largest category. But it's also to be a little bit cautious that when some groups are reporting fewer hate crimes, that's not necessarily that they are experiencing less, especially in proportionate terms, than other communities.
Thank you, Commissioner Sinar. Commissioner Salcedo? Just have a few more minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner Roybal, and thank you so much, Commissioner Levin, for your presentation. This is definitely very enlightening to all of us. I guess I would like for us to think about some populations, and particularly trans women, right? How often trans women specifically, and other trans and gender non-conforming people are constantly targets of hate incidents, right? And so and obviously harassment, right? And in some ways also the trauma, right, that this generates, right, to individuals. We know just because, of self-reporting, that, oftentimes trans women specifically, and trans people in general, are scared to come out of their house, right? Because, well, if they have a house, because of the harassment and the constant hate incidents that they experience. And so I guess we also need to consider ways to capture some of those things, right? Because I mean, if we can, I guess, do some research and ask, a trans woman, for instance, like how many, in the last 30 days, how many incidents of hate have you experienced, for instance, right? And self-reporting, again, like I think we as trans women, like we experience that almost every single day, right? And so so it's something for us to like really think about, and how do we capture data that it's, that it speaks to what needs to happen in our society, and how we can influence as a commission for some of these changes to happen. And this is obviously, is traumatic for other populations as well, right? Especially those who have lived those experiences. Hence, the shooting that happened here in Los Angeles, and so how do we also think about trauma and how that impacts people's lives?
Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. Last comment or question, Commissioner Filer? Commissioner Filer, you're on mute.
Okay. Commissioner Salcedo, thank you for what you just said. As a psychotherapist, I think it's always important to remember that the incidents, the trauma that can linger for individuals is something that isn't really documented, and is something that is quite different depending on the group and the kind of support systems they have. But I did have a question for Commissioner Levin that had to do with the research. Two questions. One is, in the reports, do we also have documentation in our prison system? The different racist attacks and hate crimes that happen there, because that's very different for different groups. And secondly, why was Los Angeles and New York neglected in the FBI report? I didn't know if you had an answer to that. So those were
I do. And just, I'm sorry, what was the first question first? I'll get to that.
It was about the prisons.
Prisons, okay.
The research within the prison systems of how hate crimes happen. Zero, okay.
I mean, or let me put it this way, about as close to zero as you can get. And you sometimes you'll see on the news, you know, certain prison lockdown because of racial issue or something like that. No, we don't get great data out of the prisons. And you know where else? Out of the schools. We could do better with that. And with regard to your other question, okay, there is a transition to a new type of data collection platform. And what it's going to do is expand the number of offenses that will come into analysis, because many people don't realize the FBI's crime data, which started back in the 1930s, really was a composite of certain crimes. It wasn't every crime. It was like, you know, sort of violent crimes. It was assault, rape, and other kind, you know, right? So we would have violent crime and property crime, but we have a limited number of offenses. It's going to expand the number of offenses, and it's also going to expand the information field about the circumstances with regard to the crime. So give you an example. One slide I didn't put in. Another increase in attacks against houses of worship. And in fact, we had much more in California, a 47% increase. But what happened was when the transition was going on, the FBI allowed a mix of kind of like classic Coke and Coke Zero. And then what happened last year, they said, nope, we're only going to take the data that has been NIBRS, National Incident-Based Reporting System, comparable. Now, California has its own version of that, but that's why a lot of the major cities were left out. So that's by default, we became a national clearinghouse because the FBI showed a decline in anti-Semitic attacks back in December. And a much smaller increase in anti-Asian. It is ridiculous. You have to, and I think a lot of the commentators here are correct. You have to have a certain level of participation. But that was the issue, this transition. However, that leaves out the systemic issues which have been occurring for years of the fact that many immigrant communities, folks with other kinds of barriers or who are scared to report, don't report. So when we say, like, you know, and this is what I got to be, everything has an asterisk, basically, what I did today. So even like the increase in folks that are reporting, I think that's going to be clustered in certain communities. It's not going to be the transgender community in Alabama, I'll tell you that. So you know, that's where we're at. But I would say, just with respect to saying whether things go up or down, they do go up or down. And we do have some limited capacity to see that. Now, there's something called reporting effect that I think Commissioner Che discussed, and we understand that. Also, some of these increases are due to better reporting and better coordination and things like that. And I think if one thing is shown, well, you know, with the decline, for instance, in anti-Asian hate crime in San Francisco, I don't think it was because everybody got all nice. I think it was because there was a massive mobilization of the Asian American community in San Francisco to do everything from protect businesses to provide escorts for elderly people. So we have to have a whole of society approach. And that's why we can talk about the little things about enhancements, but the bottom line is we're not seeing the enhancements used that much. If we can use the enhancements more as a gateway to get victims to community groups, psychotherapists, and people who know that we stand with them, I think that's easily as or more important, but we have to have some starting place.
Thank you. I think we have some public comment for this section. Is that true, Rachel?
Yes, we have two. First up is Greg DeGier, and I believe you're unmuted.
Hello again, Greg. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, hi. Thank you again. And thank you, Professor Levin, for that report. Even as somebody who's followed this for years, it's your presentation is still shocking. Question, what do you have on anti-disability hate crimes and on anti-female hate crimes? The reason I ask is because the 2001 California Attorney General's Commission on Hate Crimes found those to be by far the most underreported kinds of hate crimes. And in the case of anti-disability hate crimes, the community that I speak for sometimes, the national figures are amazing. That when you compare the Bureau of Justice statistics projection annually, which is 40,000 anti-disability hate crimes per year, which is a gross underestimate, but let's take it, compared to the number of anti-disability hate crimes that the police departments reported, which was about 150. That means that about less than 0.5% of anti-disability hate crimes are being reported. What have you got? And similar anti-female hate crime reports. What have you got on them?
Commissioner Levin, let's take the other public comment and then we'll come back to you. The second public comment, Rachel?
Yes, we have Lou Walker, and you can unmute yourself.
Welcome, Lou. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lori Walker. I'm with the Antelope Valley NAACP. And I actually just got this information from one of my committee chairs, who's been looking into commissions or looking into legislation and movements that agencies have been making to address these kinds of issues. And one of my, I definitely would like more information on your commission and how information is accessed. Somebody did touch on this before about, the parameters of what the bias crimes are. And within the prison system, within the school system, I definitely would love more information about that. And I would this is still new for me, learning of this commission. So I'm definitely interested in just obtaining more information about this commission, about the studies, about how the information is collected, and even potential bias in collecting the information as well. There's a lot of cases that I've had this past year alone where a lot of people can't even report their cases. I have a mother, 20-year-old Black woman who was punched in the face, put in jail and released after she healed, and her 4-week-old baby was held upside down by an officer. And to this day, she cannot file a report because the departments aren't even taking so many, especially when they go into the stations alone. So we'll be going public pretty soon regarding that, but right now we're gathering information, we're gathering research, and we want to have a hand in how information is reported. And even within the agencies, I was a state employee for 8 years, and it was rough because I found out even our complaints were ignored within state employment. So I definitely would love more information. You can reach us at www.naacpav.org.
Thank you, Lori. And I also would direct you to, and Alec, if you could put in the chat again, the commission info, which is there, and you can download all of the materials there. We'll also put Commissioner Levin's PowerPoint up on the site too, so that you could download it. So thank you for being here. And then the other thing I would direct you to, Lori, is the California versus Hate website, which has also a lot of information, including for folks who are victims of hate incidents or hate crimes. Alec, if you could put the California versus Hate in the chat as well. Commissioner Levin, did you want to respond before we move on?
Yeah, just real briefly, we, as you alluded, we had about 150 targeting the disabled with respect to the FBI data. There were certain groups, particularly in our city data, that don't register enough incidents where we could make a conclusion. But we get them. So, for instance, anti-Native American, we saw under 10. We know there's more than that, right? But it remains stable. Now, with regard to anti-disability, it's horrendous how we're failing the disabled community, because it's barely registering, and we know that the disabled community is actually one of the largest communities in the United States, well over 60 million people. And I think a lot of these people suffer in silence. I'll never forget it, and I'll close with this. There was a disabled young man in a wheelchair who was saying how the Human Relations Commission up in Orange County had helped him because nobody else took seriously how he was being bullied and beaten up. And oftentimes, what do we do about people who are in institutions, whether they have a mental disability? What do we do, as we heard here, with respect to people in prison? The data with respect to schools, and by the way, talking like not college right now, because there's actually a federal law that mandates crime reporting from there, but it's still not great. But for the disabled community, for those who are institutionalized either in prison or because of a medical or other condition, no, it's terrible. We don't really have a good idea, although even that appears to have increased.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin, and thank you again for your presentation today. I know all of us really appreciate that. And like I said, we'll make Commissioner Levin's PowerPoint available on the Commission website, and it'll be a part of the minutes. We just have a couple of more items of our agenda today. Next, Commission member announcements. If you have any brief announcement that you want other commissioners to know, this is the time to do that. I just want to start actually by congratulating Commissioner Suthers, who's unfortunately not with us today, for Commissioner Suthers' appointment to the Los Angeles Police Commission. I think in terms of our continued work, that will be a wonderful relationship to be able to have as we come up with policy recommendations, in particular in the law enforcement area. I also want to recognize Commissioner Cuellar for being recognized in Comstock Magazine. They did a profile on Commissioner Cuellar. And then thank Commissioner Che and Commissioner Levin, who were quoted in some articles regarding the FBI's release of its hate crime statistics. So thank you. Let's move on to other announcements. Commissioner Che.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to share that Commissioner Levin and I will actually be presenting on a panel before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights with regard to federal responses to anti-Asian racism. And I will also be naming that I am affiliated with the Commission on the State of Hate and would probably represent our work there too. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Che, if you need a couple of informational slides about the commission, Alec can provide you that. We used that at the Stop Hate convening a couple weeks ago, and it's just some general info about the commission.
Thank you. I think I'm being only given a few minutes,
okay.
So I may have to be brief. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Filer.
I'm gonna unmute. Yes, I just wanted to mention to everyone that May 4th is when we're having the Mental Health Summit at UCLA. So if any of you are in LA at that time and want to attend, please let me know. I will make that happen.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Filer. Commissioner Salcedo.
Thank you again. I just want to make an announcement that March 31st is Trans Day of Visibility. And so obviously with that also creates violence towards our community, but it's certainly a day for us to be visible and be proud of who we are. I also want to share with all of you more of as an organizational or an organizational level, that our organization is entering this new phase. We were able to purchase a piece of land, and we are going to build our new center that is going to be in Hollywood. So I hope that we can partner in this effort with all of you in some ways, and hope to continue conversations around this specific area with each of you. Thank you all for your support through with our work and through this hard times, but exciting times for our organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Salcedo. Commissioner Damsky.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, everyone. Tomorrow morning, the Anti-Defamation League is going to be presenting their report of findings that was mentioned a couple of times today. They're doing a presentation at 9 a.m. online called Fighting Hate from Home, 2023 Audit of Anti-Semitic Incidents and the State of Anti-Semitism in the U.S. Perhaps I can get our Deputy Commissioner Watts to send a link to you all. Is that a yes?
Definitely. I think I've sent it in a previous email actually, but
okay, thank you
for the reminder.
Thank you, Commissioner Dansky. Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, I have to congratulate Commissioner Che. I am so glad that we get to appear together. Both our work was very important in getting folks to take this seriously. So thank you with regard to that. The other thing is, I supposedly I'm going to be on MSNBC. I think at too early for the West Coast, but I think 8 or 9 Eastern time. But I was preempted last time because of a possible indictment. So we'll see what happens. But we'll just discuss some of the data issues. And with regard, pay attention to this ADL report, particularly what they say about assaults. From just because that's something where it tends to be more consistent and less subject to confusion. Just because if someone's got a black eye or a broken bone, that's something that's more likely to be reported and something that that has a greater consistency. That's all. So, but I got to tell you, from the data that we've been going through, I would be astounded if they didn't have a significant increase, because that's what we're showing.
Thank you, Commissioner Levin. Are there any other announcements before we move on to our next agenda item? All right, we will move on to public comment on items not on the agenda. If you have a public comment for an item that is not on the agenda, now is the time.
We do have a
great.
We do have a public comment from Greg Dozier.
Greg, welcome back. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I have a question and a comment. I'll start with the question. Your bylaws talk about having non-member advisors on the subcommittees, and there was some discussion of that at the last meeting. How does one go about applying to be such a non-member advisor? I'm interested. I know that there are some people from some of the other civil rights organizations that I'm in contact with who are interested. What do you do?
Thanks for that question, Greg. We are, as you know, we are still learning how to ride this bike of the commission. And so that is something that I know that you brought up last time, and it's something that Commissioner Salcedo and I talked about when we met with the staff. I think we will eventually get to that place, but we're not there yet, but we will definitely let you know when we put that process into place. But thank you for that comment and a reminder, and for your offer of help. It is very much appreciated.
Good. And I can let a lot of other civil rights organizations that who may or may not be interested, let them know about that too. The comment is the legislative session is in Sacramento is going full blast already, and I hope that the commission can take a thoughtful look at some of the bills that are progressing and let the legislature know what you think of them. There are 4 in particular that jump out to me based on this discussion today, the kind of things you might be interested in. One is the one I mentioned earlier, having to do with law enforcement agency training and policies. Second one is one that has to do with providing mental health services to victims. Third one is one that has to do with grants to community organizations to that are involved in restorative justice sentencing efforts. And I'll just add that personally, I really would like that bill amended to make sure that the funding criteria includes the questions that were raised by the Stanford Law and Brennan Center report on alternatives to incarceration, which was a great report. It didn't have all the answers, but it sure did ask the right questions. And finally, there's another one that has to do with selective targeting that Commissioner Che raised, and there are others that I'm sure the commissioner might want to weigh in on, and I hope you could look at those very soon.
Thank you for that comment, Greg. Greg, can you email to the commission email address the bill numbers that you are talking about so that we can take a look at those?
Yes. What is you want to put that in chat?
Yes. Alec, can you put the commission email address in the chat, please? Thank you. Thank you for that. The last item is our adjournment. So it is 11:49 p.m. I just want to thank all of you for your time today. I also want to remind you that our next commission meeting is on April 26th. The Community Forums subcommittee wants to host, in conjunction with that, a forum as Commissioner Filer and Commissioner Cuellar talked about. So pending the logistics of that may extend into the afternoon. So we'll make sure that we notice everyone way in advance as we look at the logistics around that. But I just wanted to give you a heads up. The other thing I will give you a heads up on is what I mentioned earlier, is because we are going to be discussing a strategic plan for the commission moving forward and then getting the subcommittees to comment on that. Our goal is to have that to you for the next commission meeting. We'll have a brief discussion about it and then have subcommittees go back and do some additional work on it with a target of trying to get that approved either in late May or early June. So we may take the May-June meeting and make it one meeting either in late May or early June. So we'll make sure to give you plenty of notice around that as well. And I want to again thank all of you for your time and effort today, and thank those who joined us from the public for this meeting. Your input and questions were very valuable, and we hope you will join us at our next commission meeting. And then the last thing that I want to say again is just to thank the staff who provide so much support to all of us in our work, and who, as I told Deputy Director Romero when I saw him a few weeks ago, and was said by one of the a couple of the grantees that were at the Stop the Hate convening, is, you know, it does feel sometimes like when you get to talk to bureaucrats, they say things but then do whatever they want, and that there is a real willingness on behalf of the staff. And so I just want to listen and to make changes and to create better impact where we can. And so I just again want to thank Alec and Adam and Becky, who's not here, and our colleagues in the Community Conflict Resolution Unit, because there really is a real willingness for the levers of government at the state level to really work on behalf of the community. And I think it's because each of them come from community organizations or have a community organizing background. And so again, want to thank the staff for their work and our continued work together as we continue the work of the commission. So thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your Wednesday, and we will talk again next month.
Bye.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Oh,
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner
Second.
Dusky. Is there a second? Second by Commissioner. Who seconded it? Commissioner Che. Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
I.
I.
Any opposed? All right, everyone, have a we're adjourned at 11:52.
Bravo
Bye-bye.
to our leader. Thank you. Goodbye,
Bye,
everyone.
everyone.